The pain came first. A deep, splitting fire across my chest, dragging me out of darkness. Then, the light, white, blinding, sterile. I tried to breathe, but the air clawed at my throat. A rhythmic beeping filled my ears, steady and merciless. When I finally focused, I saw ceiling panels above me, fluorescent lights, and the faint reflection of my own face on a metal cabinet. Tubes ran from my arms, monitors blinked near my head, and the dry taste of oxygen filled my mouth. "Mr. Callahan?" A woman's voice said softly. I turned my head toward the sound. A doctor stood there tall, calm, her eyes kind behind clear glasses. "You're awake," she said, her voice professional but warm. "I'm Dr. Patel. You've been through quite an ordeal. What happened to me?" My voice was a weak rasp, rough as sandpaper. "You underwent an aortic valve replacement 3 days ago," she explained. "There were complications during surgery. Your heart stopped for 52 seconds. But we brought you back. You're stable now." 52 seconds. The number hung in the air like an echo. 52 seconds without breath, without heartbeat, without life. I tried to imagine what that void felt like, what it meant, but my body ached too much to dwell on it. "You're very lucky," Dr. Patel continued. "We'll keep you under observation for another week, then begin physical therapy. How do you feel?" "Like someone parked a truck on my chest," I croaked. She smiled gently. "That's normal. You're alive, Mr. Callahan. That's what matters." When she left, the silence returned thick and mechanical, filled only by the steady rhythm of my own survival. I turned my head to the side table. My belongings sat in a neat plastic bag. Wallet, phone, watch. My fingers trembled as I reached for the phone. The hospital's Wi-Fi connected automatically, flooding the screen with notifications, bank alerts, grocery ads, pharmacy reminders, but none from the people who should have been there. No missed calls, no messages, not from Linda, not from Mark, not from Allison. My family group chat was still pinned to the top. The last message was a month-old Mark, bragging about his new gym membership. Allison sending a picture of her labradoodle. Nothing about me, nothing about the surgery I'd told them about weeks ago. I scrolled lower, hoping I'd missed something. I hadn't. The nurse entered quietly, adjusting the IV line. She was young, maybe mid-30s, with a soft voice that carried patience. "You're Henry Callahan, right?" she said, checking my chart. "I'm Mara. I'll be taking care of you today." "Thank you," I said weakly. "You didn't have to wake me up," she smiled. "You've been sleeping for a long time. Sometimes, the hardest part of healing is realizing how long you've been gone." After she left, I stared at the wall clock. The second hand swept in quiet circles, indifferent to human pain. Gone. That word echoed through me. For 52 seconds, I had been gone, and apparently, no one noticed. No worried wife calling the hospital, no son asking how I felt, no daughter sending a text, just absence. My throat tightened, and not from the tubes. I tried to remember the last time my house had felt like home. Maybe 10 years ago, before the silence between Linda and me became normal, before Mark moved back in temporarily, before Allison started treating my calls like interruptions. I had built that house myself. Every nail, every beam, every memory. Yet right now, it felt like another planet. The monitor beside my bed beeped softly. My heart rate was stable, but my thoughts were chaos. I closed my eyes, picturing the garage workshop where I'd spent my best years designing equipment for the company that had been my life's work. Machines I'd built still operated across the Midwest, but my own family couldn't be bothered to operate a phone. When Dr. Patel returned later to check my vitals, she said, "You're recovering remarkably well, Mr. Callahan. You've been given a second chance." Her words lingered. A second chance. For what? To go back to a house full of strangers? To a wife who found silence easier than love? To a son who lived off my savings and a daughter too busy for a call? I stared out the hospital window at the pale winter skyline of Springfield, Illinois. Snow clouds gathered above the city, gray and heavy. Somewhere down there, life went on as usual, people rushing, laughing, caring, and yet in this quiet room, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit before. Maybe dying once wasn't the tragedy. Maybe waking up to see who truly cared was. Outside, the clouds broke briefly, a sliver of sunlight cutting through the gray. I watched it stretch across the floor tiles toward my bed. Second chance, I whispered to myself. Let's see what I do with it. And for the first time since waking, the thought didn't hurt. It felt like the beginning. The days after the surgery passed slowly, measured by the hum of machines and the quiet footsteps of nurses changing shifts. I could feel my body getting stronger, but my mind wandered backward to the years that had shaped the silence now waiting for me at home. It was strange. The things you remember when lying in a hospital bed. Not the grand moments, the birthdays, the vacations, but the small ones that slip through unnoticed until they come back years later, sharper than they ever were. I remembered the first summer Linda and I spent in Springfield, 1982. We were newly married, broke but fearless. I had just started as a junior engineer at an agricultural manufacturing company on the edge of town. We rented a little yellow house near the train tracks. The nights were hot, and we'd sit on the porch drinking lemonade, dreaming about the future. I'll work hard, I'd told her once, so one day you'll never have to worry about anything again. She had smiled, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "You're already doing that." Some promises age like fine wine. Others rot before you realize it. By the time we moved into the house I built on Crestfield Avenue, Linda had stopped talking about the porch nights. She filled her days with shopping trips and book clubs, always wanting something newer, bigger, brighter. I told myself it was normal. People change. Responsibilities grow. Then came Mark. He was a smart boy, quick to charm, quick to want. From the time he was 10, he treated my tools like toys. I hoped he'd inherit my curiosity for machines, but Mark inherited only one thing from me: my wallet. College, business ideas, investments, I paid for them all. When his startup failed, I sold my truck to cover his debts. He promised to pay me back. He never did. Allison was different. She was soft-spoken, artistic, the one I thought would stay grounded. But when she met Ryan, a young doctor from Chicago, everything changed. Suddenly, my work-worn hands embarrassed her. "Dad, maybe don't wear that old jacket to dinner, okay?" She'd whisper, eyes darting around the restaurant. I laughed it off, said it didn't bother me. But it did. Linda didn't notice. Or maybe she did and didn't care. By 2015, she'd turned our house into her domain. Every decision about decor, every dinner menu, every conversation filtered through her. I became the quiet figure in the background, the one who made the lights stay on and the mortgage stay paid. Then came 2018, the first warning sign. I was out in the garage, tuning an old generator for a neighbor. The sharp pain hit me mid-turn of the wrench. It was like an iron fist inside my chest. I leaned against the wall, waiting for it to pass. Linda found me minutes later, sweating and pale. "Maybe it's anxiety," she said, handing me a bottle of water. "You worry too much." The next day, she drove to her sister's house for the weekend. I never mentioned it again, but it didn't stop. The tightness came and went for years, small reminders that something inside me was failing. I kept working, ignoring it, telling myself it would go away. Men like me don't fall apart, we just rust quietly. Then last spring, I collapsed in the backyard. The mower was still running when I hit the ground. I remember the smell of cut grass and gasoline, the faint sound of a neighbor's radio. When I woke up in the ER, Mark and Linda weren't there. I asked the nurse to check if they'd been called. "They said they'll come tomorrow," she told me. Tomorrow never came. That was when Dr. Patel first warned me. "You're out of time, Mr. Callahan. You need surgery within 6 months." I went home that day and told Linda. She didn't look up from her tablet. "You'll be fine," she said. "You always are." She didn't ask about the risks, didn't ask how scared I was. For years, I had convinced myself that silence was peace. But lying in that hospital bed, I realized it had been indifference. The kind that kills a man slowly, long before his heart gives out. I had spent decades fixing things, machines, engines, systems, but never the people closest to me. Maybe I thought love was a kind of maintenance too. If you keep it running, it won't break. But love doesn't work like that. The nurse entered to check my vitals. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Callahan?" I looked out at the cold Springfield skyline. "Like I'm finally seeing the truth," I said. She smiled politely. not understanding. But I did. All those years of giving, all those quiet sacrifices, had bought me nothing but distance. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was just done pretending. By the end of the second week, the doctors were smiling again. My numbers were strong, my heart steady, and for the first time since the surgery, I could walk down the hall without feeling like my ribs were filled with glass. Dr. Patel told me I'd be discharged that Friday if recovery stayed on track. "Congratulations, Mr. Callahan," she said, handing me the official release form. "You're getting a second life. Take it slowly, but make it yours. Make it mine." The words stuck with me as I sat alone in my hospital room, folding my few belongings into the duffel bag I'd had for 20 years. My watch, a paperback, my reading glasses, everything that mattered fit into one bag. Outside, Springfield was wrapped in pale winter sunlight. Snow clung to car roofs in the parking lot, melting in uneven patches. I could already imagine the quiet ride home, maybe stopping for soup from the diner near our neighborhood. Maybe, just maybe, Linda would have made the house feel warm again. I opened my phone and typed into our family group chat. "Doctor says I can go home today. Anyone free to drive me?" The 3 dots blinked almost instantly. Someone was typing. I smiled. Maybe they'd surprise me after all. Then the message appeared. "Mark, take an Uber, Dad. I'm at the gym." I stared at it, not quite believing. The blinking dots came again. Another message. "Linda, stay another week. It's been so peaceful without all that noise." Noise. That's what she called me now. Noise. The phone slipped from my hand and landed softly on the blanket. My chest tightened again, not the surgical pain this time, but something sharper, heavier. I'd spent a lifetime building a home for people who didn't want to come pick me up. The nurse, Mara, stepped in a few minutes later. "Mr. Callahan, everything okay? You look pale." I didn't answer right away. I just gestured weakly toward the phone. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, then met my eyes with quiet sympathy. "Family?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out hollow. She nodded slowly. "I see that a lot here. People think hospitals only heal the body. But sometimes, they show you what's broken in your life too." Her words hit deeper than she knew. After she left, I sat there in silence for a long time. The monitor beside me beeped softly. Somewhere down the hall, another patient laughed with visiting relatives. I tried to imagine Linda's face if she saw me now pale, stitched together, waiting alone with a discharge form in hand. She'd probably frown and say, "You look tired. You should rest." I should have felt anger. But instead, what came was something quieter. Resignation. I looked down at the papers Dr. Patel had given me. Medication instructions, follow-up appointments, dietary restrictions. But to me, they read like something else entirely, a manual for freedom. At exactly noon, I signed the final line, handed the clipboard to the nurse, and stood carefully. My chest ached, but I could walk. That was enough. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, cutting through my hospital gown as I stepped into the taxi bay. A driver in a worn Cubs cap waved. "Need a ride, sir?" "Yes," I said, gripping the doorframe for balance. "Home, please." He nodded, helping me into the back seat. "Rough week?" "Rough 40 years," I muttered. The city rolled by outside old brick buildings, snow-dusted roofs, people rushing to jobs, stores, families. It was a world I'd spent decades supporting, but never really lived in. Halfway home, the driver spoke again. "Family not around?" "They're around," I said quietly, "just not where it matters." He gave me a long look in the rearview mirror but said nothing. When we pulled into my street, I saw my house for the first time in a month. The siding was faded. The porch lights burned out. Even from the outside, it looked tired, like it had been waiting for someone who stopped showing up. As I paid the driver, he said, "Hope someone's home to welcome you." "Me too," I replied, though we both knew the answer. I stood there for a moment, snow crunching under my shoes, staring at the front door. Then I smiled, faint but real. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was coming home. I felt like I was leaving something behind. The taxi pulled away, leaving me standing in the gray afternoon chill. My driveway was half buried under a thin crust of snow, tire tracks cutting across it in uneven arcs. Someone had been using my car, the mud on the tires told me that much. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers clumsy from the cold, and pushed open the front door. The smell hit me first. Stale air mixed with something sour, like old takeout. I flipped the light switch, but the bulb flickered once, and died. The house I had built with my own hands, every wall, every nail, felt smaller, darker, lifeless. I stepped inside, my heart monitor's faint adhesive tugging at my chest. The living room looked like a dorm room after finals week. Pizza boxes, soda cans, clothes scattered on the couch. A half-empty bottle of whiskey stood proudly on the coffee table. The television was frozen on a paused streaming show. Someone's account logged in under my name. On the recliner sat a pile of mail bills, flyers, and 2 envelopes marked "Final Notice." They hadn't even bothered hiding it. I moved toward the kitchen. The sink was filled with dishes crusted in dried food, and the refrigerator hummed like an old truck ready to die. Inside, there was expensive wine, imported cheese, and takeout containers from restaurants I'd never been to. Apparently, Linda and Mark had been eating well while I was fighting for my life. My study was the worst. That room had been my sanctuary, the one space where I still felt like myself. I used to sit at that oak desk late into the night, sketching designs, tinkering with prototypes, dreaming of projects I might finish after retirement. Now, it looked like a storage dump. Boxes of Linda's online shop supplies were stacked against the wall, crowding out my drafting table. Mark's old gaming equipment was piled in the corner, cables knotted like vines. Dust coated everything. I reached for the bookshelf, brushing a hand over the framed photo of our wedding day. Linda had been beautiful, then eyes full of hope, hand gripping mine like she believed in forever. Now, her absence filled the room louder than any argument we'd ever had. I sank into the one chair that wasn't buried under junk. The ache in my chest wasn't surgical anymore, it was something deeper, older. The safe was behind the bookshelf. I'd built it into the wall back in 1994, back when I still trusted everyone who lived under this roof. The combination came to me easily, Mark's birthday. I'd chosen it because I'd thought he'd always remember it if anything happened to me. The safe door opened with a soft metallic click. Inside were neatly stacked folders, a few old savings bonds, and my will. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. The words glared up at me like ghosts from another life. To my beloved wife, Linda Callahan, the house and all possessions contained within. To my son, Mark Callahan, all financial assets and retirement accounts. To my daughter, Allison, any remaining holdings or residual funds. Beloved wife, dutiful son, devoted daughter. I laughed, bitter and quiet. The sound startled me in the silence. My eyes caught another folder tucked beneath the will, one I hadn't opened in years. It was labeled Callahan Designs, 1989-2001. Inside were blueprints and old contracts from the early days of my engineering work. Designs for adjustable irrigation valves and a grain separator I'd invented back when my ideas actually excited people. One page was marked with a sticky note in my handwriting. Patents filed, ownership retained. I froze. Ownership retained. Most of those projects had been contracted out to agricultural suppliers, but I'd never sold the patent rights. My signature was still on every original document. That meant every piece of equipment still in use, machines across Illinois, Iowa, even Nebraska, was generating quiet royalties under my name. Royalties that, as far as I knew, no one else was aware of. I turned on my old desktop computer, praying it still worked. After a few coughs of static and the hum of the hard drive, the screen flickered to life. I logged into the account I hadn't touched in years, scrolling through the financial statements. Then, my breath caught. There it was, monthly deposits, small but consistent, flowing from multiple manufacturers. Added up, it was substantial. More than substantial. Over the years, those small payments had grown into something close to 7 figures. 7 figures that Linda and Mark had no idea existed. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the glowing numbers. The anger that had simmered for days turned cold, precise. They thought I was coming home broken and helpless. They thought I had nothing left to give, no strength to fight, but they were wrong, very wrong. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of the old wood creaking beneath me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small in my own house. I felt awake. I looked around the ruined study one last time, at the piles of junk, the layers of dust, the life they'd built on my back. Then I reached for my phone, opened the browser, and typed, "Estate lawyers near Springfield, Illinois." The screen filled with names, numbers, and polished websites. My finger hovered over one listing Haynes and Burke, estate planning, and trust law. I clicked it. "Let's see," I murmured to myself. "What a second chance is really worth." Outside, the sun was setting, gold light spilling through the dirty blinds. It hit the edge of my will, illuminating the words, "beloved wife," like a cruel joke. By tomorrow, that would all be rewritten. The next morning, I was awake before sunrise. I hadn't slept much, but for the first time in years, the exhaustion felt purposeful. I brewed coffee, ignoring the piles of mess still littering my kitchen, and reviewed the papers from my safe. The faint warmth of the mug steadied my hands. The royalties were real. The account was active. All of it quiet, untouched, waiting for someone who still had the strength to care. By 8 a.m., I'd already showered, shaved, and dressed in my old gray suit. It hung a bit loose on me since the surgery, but it still carried a kind of dignity. When I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, I didn't see the man who'd begged for love from an empty house. I saw someone else. Someone ready. The downtown law office of Haynes and Burke was in a tall glass building overlooking the Sangamon River. The receptionist, a young woman with the kind of practiced smile that comes from years of polite conversations, offered me water while I waited. "Mr. Callahan?" she said a few minutes later. "Attorney Charlotte Haynes will see you now." Charlotte was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun and an expression that mixed intellect with empathy. She rose from behind a mahogany desk and shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Callahan, please sit. I understand you're looking to update your estate documents?" "Yes," I said, sliding the old will across her desk. "I want to change everything." She skimmed the papers, eyebrows arching slightly. "Everything?" "Everything," I repeated. "The house, the accounts, the patents, the investments. I want it all transferred into a charitable trust. None of it goes to my family." Her eyes lifted from the page. "That's a very serious decision. May I ask what's prompting it?" I hesitated only for a second before pulling out my phone. I opened the family group chat, the messages from the day I was discharged. She read them silently. "Stay another week. It's peaceful without you," she murmured. "And this one? Take an Uber. I'm at the gym." I nodded. That was the day I came back from heart surgery. I'd been clinically dead for nearly a minute. Not one of them came to pick me up. Charlotte exhaled softly. "I've seen bitterness drive decisions like this before, Mr. Callahan. But what you're describing, it's not bitterness. It's clarity." That's exactly what I told myself. She leaned back, tapping a pen against her notepad. "Do you have a specific charity in mind?" "Yes, the Midwest Heart Research Foundation. They funded part of the cardiac equipment that saved me, and I want half of the proceeds from my patent royalties to go toward engineering scholarships for low-income students in Illinois." Her expression softened. "That's an extraordinary legacy. You understand that once this is finalized, your family will have no legal claim to your estate?" "I understand," I said. "They had 40 years to earn it." "They didn't." Charlotte's tone turned respectful, almost admiring. "Very well. I'll draft the documents today. Once we have witnesses, you'll need to sign before a notary. After that, it's binding." I signed the retainer papers, paid her initial fee, and left her office feeling lighter than I had in decades. The old version of me, the man who always apologized, who always explained himself, was gone. In his place stood someone who didn't owe anyone anything. I was halfway to the elevator when the receptionist called out. "Mr. Callahan?" Miss Haynes asked if you'd be open to a public story. "There's a media coordinator at the foundation who'd like to meet you." I paused. "A public story?" "Yes, sir. They're preparing a campaign for Heart Health Awareness Month. Your story could inspire others." For a moment, I almost said no, but then I thought of Linda's words, "peaceful without you," and Mark's smug laziness. "Set it up," I said. The foundation's offices were just 3 floors down. The lobby was bright, filled with posters of smiling survivors and families holding red ribbons. Behind a glass door marked Public Relations, a woman stood to greet me. "Mr. Callahan? I'm Rebecca Tran, Media Director. It's an honor to meet you." She led me into her office, walls lined with framed newspaper clippings. "Your attorney told me a bit about your situation," she said gently. "We'd love to help you share it. If you're comfortable." "Share it how?" "Local news first, then maybe a human interest feature. People connect deeply with stories of redemption and generosity, especially when it comes from pain." "Pain I have plenty of," I said dryly. She smiled, understanding. "We'll focus on what came after the pain, the healing, the purpose. You'd be surprised how much good one honest story can do." She spent the next hour coaching me through questions that reporters might ask. She wanted me to be truthful but measured. "We won't name them," she said. "Your family. But people will understand. They always do." That afternoon, we met a small film crew at my house. The news anchor, David Martinez, was polite, professional, and kind enough to pretend not to notice the chaos of the half-cleaned living room. He adjusted his tie and said, "Mr. Callahan, thank you for speaking with us. Just tell your story like you're talking to a friend." The camera light came on. David asked, "What made you decide to donate everything?" I looked directly into the lens. When I was lying in that hospital bed, I realized something simple. I had spent my whole life fixing machines, but never the people who were breaking me. When I needed them most, they were silent. Now, I want my silence to mean something. David nodded, his expression respectful. "And why this cause?" "Because they saved my life," I said. "And because love, like a heartbeat, should be mutual. When it's one-sided, it dies." The interview ended with a handshake. The crew packed up and promised it would air that evening. As they left, Rebecca turned to me. "Are you ready for this to go public? It might reach more people than you expect." "I hope it does," I said quietly. "I've lived too long in shadows." That night, at 6 p.m., I sat in a diner on the corner of 5th and Adams, sipping soup while the evening news flickered on the TV above the counter. The headline read, "Springfield engineer donates entire fortune to Heart Foundation after family abandons him." My face filled the screen, calm, collected, free. Across town, I imagined Linda and Mark watching the same broadcast. And for the first time in years, I smiled without guilt. Across town, in the house that used to feel like mine, the television flickered to life at exactly 6 p.m. Linda sat curled on the couch with a glass of white wine in her hand. Mark lounged nearby, feet up on the coffee table, scrolling through his phone. The sound of the news played like background noise until the anchor's tone changed. "A Springfield engineer is making headlines tonight after donating his entire fortune to a heart foundation. But it's the reason behind his generosity that has people talking." Linda's glass froze midair. Mark glanced up from his screen. The image on the TV changed. My face filled the frame. "Mr. Henry Callahan," the reporter said, "recently survived major heart surgery. During his recovery, he discovered that the people closest to him had turned away. His decision afterward has shocked everyone." Then came the clip of me, sitting in my living room, speaking directly to the camera. "When I asked my family to pick me up from the hospital," I said calmly, "my son told me to call an Uber because he was at the gym. My wife said it was peaceful without me, so I decided to give my peace to someone who deserved it." The camera panned across the house, their house showing the walls, the framed photos, the mail piled by the door. The anchor's voice followed. "Mr. Callahan has transferred his entire estate, estimated at several $1,000,000, to the Midwest Heart Research Foundation." Linda's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. "Mark," she whispered, Did he?" Mark's face had drained of color. "That's our house. That's my room in the shot. How could he can't do that?" The broadcast continued, cutting to Rebecca Tran from the foundation. "Mr. Callahan's gift will fund scholarships and heart research across the Midwest. It's a testament to what happens when compassion outlives disappointment." The interview ended. The news anchor smiled sympathetically. "A powerful story of resilience and generosity from right here in Illinois." For a long moment, The room was silent except for the faint hum of the TV. Then Linda exploded. "Turn that off. Turn it off right now." Mark muted the screen, his hands trembling. He's lost his mind. The surgery messed with his brain. "He doesn't know what he's doing." Linda's voice shook. "We need to call him. Right now." Mark was already dialing. I saw the screen light up on my end, buzzing quietly on the diner table beside my coffee. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then again. By the 10th call, I switched the phone to silent. By the 20th, I turned it off completely. When I left the diner, the waitress gave me a knowing smile. "That was you on TV, wasn't it?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. She patted my arm. "Good for you." That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke to pounding on the front door. The kind of pounding that came with panic. I knew who it was before I opened it. Linda stood on the porch, her hair uncombed, mascara smeared from a sleepless night. Mark loomed behind her, face tight with anger. "Henry," Linda began, voice trembling. "What have you done? You embarrassed us in front of the entire city." I stepped aside, letting them see the living room where the cameras had been. "I told the truth," I said simply. "It's amazing how that tends to travel fast." Mark shoved past her. "You can't just give away the house. It's ours too." "Actually," I said calmly, "it's not. The deed is in my name. Always has been." Linda stared at me like she didn't recognize me. "We were your family. You can't erase that." "You already did," I said, with 2 text messages. She flinched, as if I'd struck her. "Henry." I was joking. You know how we tease. "Joking?" My voice rose. Not with rage, but with disbelief. "You told me to stay in the hospital because life was peaceful without me." "I almost died, Linda. I died for 52 seconds. And you found it convenient." Mark cut in, his voice sharp. "You're overreacting. You wouldn't even have money if it weren't for us keeping the house running all these years." I turned to him slowly. "Mark, you haven't paid a single bill in that house since you moved back in. You've lived off me like a parasite since your 20s. The only thing you've managed to keep running is the fridge and your excuses." He stepped closer, fists clenched. "You're not kicking us out. I don't care what you think you're doing." I held his gaze. "I'm not thinking, son. I'm deciding. You have 24 hours to leave." Linda gasped. "Henry, you can't be serious. Where will we go?" "I have nowhere. Not my concern anymore," I said. "You've had 40 years of security. I've had 40 years of silence." Mark's voice cracked into anger. "You're heartless." I almost laughed. I was all heart. That's what killed me. Linda's tears finally came, thick and theatrical. "Henry, please. We can fix this. We'll change. We'll start fresh. Family is supposed to forgive. Forgiveness and trust are not the same," I interrupted. "And I've already forgiven you. But I'll never trust you again." The clock in the hallway ticked softly, each second marking the distance growing between us. Mark swore under his breath and stormed toward the door. "You'll regret this, old man. People will think you're cruel." "They can think what they want," I said. "I've already lived their version of me. Now I'm living mine." Linda lingered in the doorway, trembling. "You can't survive without us." I looked her dead in the eye. "Then it's time you learn how unnecessary you were to my survival." They left together, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. For a long moment, the house was silent again, truly silent. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the one small ritual I still owned, and sat by the window. Through the blinds, I watched their car reverse down the driveway, snow kicking up under the tires. As they disappeared from view, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not triumph. Just peace. For 40 years, I'd given everything I had to a family that never gave anything back. Now, I finally understood what freedom felt like. I looked at the clock on the wall and said to no one in particular, 24 hours. Then it's just me. And for the first time, that sounded perfect. The morning after they left was quieter than I ever remembered. The kind of quiet that used to scare me now felt like sunlight after a long storm. The coffee maker gurgled softly in the kitchen, and for once, there was no one yelling for milk, no television blaring, no heavy footsteps pacing upstairs. Just me. For a while, I sat on the porch wrapped in an old flannel blanket, watching the frost melt on the railing. Across the street, Mrs. Davenport from next door waved politely as she carried out her recycling bin. I waved back. Her knowing smile told me she'd seen the news. Everyone had. A few days later, I called the foundation office. Rebecca answered on the first ring. "Mr. Callahan," she said brightly, "I hope you're ready for some good news." I laughed. "At this age, I'll take whatever kind I can get." "The broadcast went viral," she said. 3 regional stations picked it up. The foundation's donations tripled overnight. "You've inspired more people than you can imagine." I leaned back in my chair, surprised by the warmth those words gave me. "Then I suppose that's worth more than a comfortable retirement." "We were also contacted by the Illinois Engineering Council," she added. "They'd like to honor you next month for your lifetime of innovation and philanthropy." For a moment, I couldn't find words. Recognition wasn't something I was used to. I'd spent my life behind machines, not microphones. "Tell them." "I'll think about it," I said finally. After we hung up, I looked around the house half empty now, stripped of clutter and chaos. I'd spent the past few days cleaning, clearing out years of noise. Each trash bag that went out to the curb felt like a weight off my chest. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork, I opened my computer to check the foundation's transfer account. The royalties from my patents had continued to come in, quietly accumulating interest even after I'd signed them over. But something else caught my eye, a new email from an international agricultural company based in Germany. Subject: Request for license renewal. Callahan Valve System, Model Triampere. I frowned, opening the message. They were asking to renew usage rights for one of my earliest designs, one I'd nearly forgotten about. Attached was an offer, a 10-year global license, worth over $7 million. $7 million. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat steady but heavy. Even after all this time, the work of my younger years was still building something. I called Charlotte, my attorney, immediately. "Charlotte," I said, trying to sound calm, "I think my fortune just multiplied itself." When I explained, she chuckled softly. "That contract falls under your intellectual property trust. Legally, the royalties belong to your foundation now. Every cent will go toward your scholarships and medical grants." I sat in stunned silence. "So my story, my donation, it just grew by 7 million? More, actually," she said. "By the time it's signed and taxed, the total value will exceed 9 million. You may have just created one of the largest private charitable endowments in Illinois this year." For a long moment, all I could do was breathe. I thought of the man I'd been tired, ignored, half dead in a hospital bed, and realized how far I'd come. "Charlotte," I said softly, "I think that's the best kind of revenge there is." That week the story hit national headlines. Abandoned heart patient's donation now tops $9 million. Newspapers from Chicago to St. Louis called me a symbol of resilience. Reporters left messages asking for interviews, but I turned most of them down. I didn't need more attention. I'd already said everything I needed to. Instead, I started living the life I'd postponed for 40 years. I joined a local photography group, bought an old camper van, and began driving through the countryside, capturing the quiet beauty of the Midwest. Rusted barns under pink skies, frozen cornfields glinting under morning frost, empty bridges that looked like veins of steel. I sent my photos to Rebecca for the foundation's newsletters. She loved them. "They show life after heartbreak," she told me. On one of my trips, in a small town near Peoria, I met Tom Jensen, a retired physics teacher traveling alone in an RV. He noticed my camera and struck up a conversation about light angles and patience. That night, we shared a campfire and stories about the families we'd both lost to neglect, not death. A week later, we were joined by Sarah, a widow who volunteered at shelters and traveled with her rescue dog. The three of us became unlikely friends. People who had learned the hard way that peace sometimes begins where family ends. Over time, I found joy in helping others without expecting anything back. I visited hospitals to speak with cardiac patients, telling them recovery wasn't just about the body, it was about rediscovering your worth. Sometimes, I'd say, the greatest heart surgery is emotional. The day you stop begging for love, your pulse gets stronger. The applause from those small hospital rooms meant more to me than any family dinner ever had. Months passed. The foundation invited me to their annual gala, but I declined. I didn't need the stage or applause. What mattered was the quiet ripple of good my decision had created. And yet, one late September afternoon, while reading on my porch, a letter arrived. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. "Dad," it began, "I saw your interview again online. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I got a job as a technician in Chicago. It's not much, but it's honest work. I wanted to say thank you for cutting me off. It saved me in ways I didn't understand before. If you ever want to meet for coffee, I'd like that." It was signed, simply, Mark. I folded the letter slowly, feeling the wind brush against my cheek. There was no promise of reconciliation, no apology, just a small truth. Change, that was enough. I poured myself another cup of coffee, looked out at the fading horizon, and whispered, "Better late than never." Somewhere, a cardinal landed on the porch rail, bright and alive against the gray sky. I smiled. Freedom didn't always look like a mansion or a fortune. Sometimes, it looked like one man sitting alone with peace, and knowing he'd finally done something right. October arrived with crisp air and golden trees along the streets of Springfield. I was sitting at my favorite cafe downtown, reviewing photos from my last road trip when the doorbell chimed softly. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. Some things you just feel in your chest, like an old heartbeat coming back to rhythm. "Dad," a voice said quietly. I looked up. Mark stood there, hesitant but different. His usual slouch was gone. His hair was trimmed short, and his clothes, simple jeans, and a gray jacket made him look older, steadier. There was no entitlement in his eyes this time, only uncertainty. "May I sit?" he asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. "It's a free country." He smiled faintly and sat down. "You look good, healthier than before." "I feel better," I said. "Turns out peace is good for the heart." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I wanted to thank you for replying to my letter." "It was a good letter," I said. "No excuses, just truth. I appreciated that." We sat in silence for a moment, both unsure how to bridge the distance between past and present. Finally, Mark spoke again. "I got a job at a repair shop in Chicago, full-time. Been there 3 months now. My boss says I've got a steady hand for engine work." I smiled. "You always did. You just never wanted to use it." "I know," he said softly. "You were right. I was lazy, entitled. I thought money would always be there. Because you were always there. When you cut me off, I was angry. But later, I realized it was the first time I had to stand on my own." He took a deep breath. "I don't expect anything from you now. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. That I finally understand what you were teaching me all those years." Something inside me loosened. I didn't say much, just reached for my coffee and nodded. "I'm proud of you for that," I said quietly. We talked for over an hour. Nothing dramatic, just simple, honest conversation. He showed me photos of his small apartment, his tools lined neatly on a workbench. He told me how he sometimes volunteered to fix old cars for veterans who couldn't afford repairs. "I guess I learned that from you," he said, smiling. When we finally stood to leave, he hesitated. "Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just hope maybe, one day, we can have coffee again. Maybe even start new." I studied his face. He was no longer the boy who demanded. He was a man who understood cost. "Maybe," I said. "But remember, forgiveness isn't given to erase the past, it's given to make peace with it." He nodded. "I get that." We walked out together into the cool afternoon. He headed toward his old sedan, a little dented but clean, and waved before driving away. I watched until the car disappeared down the street. Then I turned and began walking home, slow but steady. When I reached the house, the porch light flickered on automatically, casting a warm glow over the steps. The air smelled like leaves, and the faint sweetness of autumn rain. I went inside, hung my jacket, and sat down at my desk. The framed letter from the foundation still hung above it for Henry Callahan, whose heart gave twice, once to survive and once to give. I looked at it for a long moment. That plaque wasn't about money. It was about meaning. Outside the window, the last of the daylight turned the horizon gold. I thought about the people I'd met, the patients I'd spoken to, the strangers who'd written letters after seeing my story, all the lives touched by one simple act of reclaiming self-worth. When my heart had stopped for 52 seconds, I thought I'd lost everything. But what I really lost that day were illusions, the idea that love could exist without respect, that giving endlessly was the same as being valued. I'd learned the truth the hard way. Love means nothing without reciprocity, and silence can be the loudest answer of all. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I whispered the lesson I wished I'd learned sooner. When people show you how little you mean to them, I said softly, believe them, and then build your peace from there. My chest no longer hurt when I breathed. It felt open, strong, alive. Maybe, after all those years, my heart had finally found its rhythm, not from what I gave away, but from what I finally kept for myself. The quiet filled the room again, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was home.